The first thing that felt wrong was seeing someone already sitting in my truck before I'd even unlocked it. I remember stopping mid-step with my key fob still in my hand, maybe 30 feet away in the parking lot outside Ranger Station 4, just staring through the windshield, trying to figure out if I was looking at a reflection or an actual person. It was around 2:13 in the morning according to the clock above the equipment bay, cold enough that the hood of the truck had a layer of frost forming on it, and the interior should have been completely dark. But there was definitely someone in the driver's seat, just sitting there, head slightly tilted toward the steering wheel. At first, I honestly thought maybe one of the other rangers had borrowed it and forgotten something inside, but then I noticed the doors were still locked, because the hazard lights blinked when I pressed the fob, and the silhouette didn't move at all. Not even a flinch. I stopped walking immediately. My radio crackled right then too, this burst of overlapping static that almost sounded like talking underneath it, and dispatch asked for a routine location check from another unit about 6 miles north near Carson Ridge. I answered automatically without taking my eyes off the truck. Unit 4 at Station Lot, I said, and I remember hearing my own voice shake a little. The figure inside still hadn't moved. I probably stood there for 20 seconds trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe it was a pile of gear on the seat. Maybe the angle was weird. But then, the shape leaned slightly toward the window. Just enough. Human movement. Small. Slow. I backed up without really meaning to. There's this thing they teach you working park service in isolated areas where your brain wants to jump to animals first because it's less frightening than another person. Mountain lion, bear, elk. Anything except somebody watching you from inside your own vehicle at 2 in the morning. I called out once, "Hey!" No response. Then louder, "You need to step out of the vehicle." Nothing. The station floodlight buzzed overhead, flickering faintly, and I could see condensation on the inside of the windshield, like someone had been breathing in there for a while. That's the detail I still think about. The truck had been parked for almost 5 hours. I knew because I logged the mileage myself after patrol. I reached for my flashlight, but before I even turned it on, the silhouette shifted again and suddenly disappeared downward, like whoever it was had ducked into the passenger seat. I drew my sidearm then, not dramatically, more out of confusion than fear. My brain still couldn't connect what I was seeing with something reasonable. I approached slowly from the rear driver's side and hit the flashlight through the glass. Empty. Completely empty. No one inside. The seats were clear, except for my jacket and a clipboard on the passenger floor. I checked the back seat. Nothing. Every door still locked. Windows sealed. I remember actually laughing once under my breath because adrenaline does weird things to you. And for a second, I felt embarrassed. Like maybe exhaustion had gotten to me. I unlocked the truck manually and opened the driver's door. Warm air drifted out. Not hot, but warmer than outside. Warm enough that it immediately bothered me. My keys were still clipped to my belt. Nobody should have been in there. Then the radio clipped to my vest gave another burst of static, much louder this time, and a voice cut through underneath it. Unit 4, still inside. I froze. Dispatch frequencies are recorded, logged, time-stamped, all of it. And this wasn't dispatch. The voice sounded male, maybe middle-aged, strained like he was talking through heavy interference. Unit 4, respond. Then static swallowed it. I answered instinctively. Go ahead. Silence. I checked the radio screen. Wrong channel entirely. Not just wrong frequency. A dead band. One of the old emergency frequencies phased out years earlier after the wildfire seasons back in the late 90s. I only knew that because during training they'd shown us archived incident reports from the old analog system. That channel shouldn't have carried anything anymore. I asked dispatch if they copied the transmission. They didn't. Said my signal had broken for a second. I climbed into the truck mostly because standing outside suddenly felt worse. Irrational maybe, but true. I kept thinking about the condensation on the windshield. The seat was slightly reclined farther back than I remembered, too, though I can admit memory gets unreliable under stress. I drove out around 2:30 toward the Eastern Patrol Road. because there'd been reports earlier that week about illegal campers cutting through the restricted burn area. It wasn't uncommon. People sneak in all the time thinking national parks are basically empty. At night, what most visitors don't realize is incidents like this happen more often than people think, especially in sections closed after fires, because landmarks disappear and radios get unreliable around damaged repeater towers. About 20 minutes into patrol, I passed mile marker 11 and noticed headlights deep in the trees off the service road. Not moving, just sitting there. No registered campground nearby. I logged the coordinates verbally into dispatch and pulled closer. It looked like an older SUV, maybe late 90s model, partially hidden behind burned timber from the previous season. No plates visible from the angle I had. Engine off. The strange part was the frost around it had already been disturbed, meaning somebody had been walking around recently. I could see footprints cutting away from the driver's side into the woods. One set only. Dispatch tried running partial vehicle descriptors while I followed the tracks about 30 yards with my flashlight. They ended abruptly near a drainage ditch filled with ash and snowmelt. Not faded, not scattered, just stopped. Like the person stepped onto stone. I scanned the trees for movement, and that's when my radio hit the static again. Same burst, same overlapping voices underneath. Then the same man came through clearer this time. Don't let him back in the truck. I stopped walking immediately. Identify yourself, I said. No answer. Just a horrible screech of feedback. Dispatch interrupted asking who I was talking to because they hadn't transmitted anything. I told them I was receiving interference again and headed back toward the road because suddenly I didn't like how far from the vehicle I'd wandered. My flashlight caught fresh movement near my truck before I reached it. Someone was standing beside the passenger door. Tall, dark jacket. I shouted immediately and started running the last stretch. The figure moved around the rear of the truck out of sight. By the time I reached the vehicle, nobody was there. But the passenger door was open. I know I locked it. I know that absolutely. My clipboard had been tossed onto the seat, and my radio logbook was missing. I checked under the seats thinking maybe it slid off during the drive, but it was gone. Dispatch started asking if I needed county backup because my breathing was getting heavy over transmission. I told them negative, probably just a trespasser trying to mess with me, but honestly, I wasn't convinced anymore. There was this feeling building in my chest that somebody had been near me much longer than I realized. I got back in the truck and noticed something else immediately. The radio channel knob had been changed manually, turned exactly to the inactive frequency from earlier. I hadn't touched it. My hand actually hovered over the dial for a second, because suddenly that earlier voice didn't feel random anymore. I switched back to dispatch and started heading toward the south entrance to file the incident in person. About halfway there, the transmission came again. No static at first this time, just breathing, slow breathing. Then the man spoke. Check the rear compartment. I slammed the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed slightly on gravel. I remember my own pulse sounding louder than the engine. My rifle compartment was vented behind the back seats, separated by a steel partition. Nobody could physically fit there, but I still turned around slowly with the flashlight raised. Empty. Then something shifted behind me. Tiny movement. Reflection in the side mirror. Somebody sitting upright in the back seat directly behind my head. I spun around so fast I hit my shoulder on the steering wheel. Empty again. Nothing there. But the backseat seatbelt was swinging slightly, just enough movement to notice. I drew my weapon fully at that point and exited the truck. I checked every door, every angle underneath. I even opened the rear equipment hatch. Nothing. The forest around me had gone dead quiet too. No insects, no wind, just the engine idling and the faint hiss of radio static from inside the cab. Then dispatch called asking why my GPS beacon showed me stopped in the middle of Route 6 for nearly 10 minutes when I'd only pulled over maybe 40 seconds earlier. I looked at the dashboard clock. 3:17 a.m. The last time I'd checked it was 2:41. I still can't explain that part logically. Maybe shock distorts memory. Maybe I blanked out longer than I realized. But I know I didn't stand there for half an hour. I got back in the truck and drove straight to Southgate Station without stopping again. When I arrived, Deputy Collins from County was already there waiting, because dispatch had escalated the situation after losing intermittent contact with me. We searched the truck completely under floodlights. That's when Collins found my missing logbook tucked underneath the driver's seat rails, wet, mud smeared across the cover, and inside, on the page where I'd logged mileage earlier that night, someone had written a sentence in shaky block letters using my own pen. He keeps asking for a ride. Collins assumed it was some kind of prank. Honestly, for a while I tried to believe that too. A squatter maybe. Someone hiding around the station messing with vehicles and radio equipment. But the part nobody could answer came the next morning when communications technicians reviewed the transmission records. There had been a signal bleed onto my inactive frequency around 2:14 a.m. and again around 2:52. Weak but real. Analog source. Old-style Ranger handset. The strange thing was, the identifier attached to the signal belonged to a Park Service vehicle decommissioned after a wildfire evacuation in 1998. Unit 4. Same designation as my truck. Apparently the old vehicle had gone missing for nearly 2 days during that fire before they recovered it, abandoned near Carson Ridge, with no Ranger inside. I didn't know any of that when the voice came over my radio. Nobody had mentioned it before because it wasn't important anymore. At least that's what they told me. I transferred districts 3 months later. Different park, different state. I still work service roads sometimes, still do nighttime patrols, and every now and then I'll catch myself checking the back seat before unlocking the truck, even though I know how stupid that sounds. But there's one thing I never completely got over. About a year after the incident, I was cleaning out old gear from my locker and found that same radio logbook shoved inside a storage crate I hadn't touched since leaving the station. The muddy writing was still there except for one detail I swear hadn't been there before. Under the original sentence, pressed faintly into the paper like someone wrote it without ink, there was another line I could only see when the page caught the light sideways. You already let him in.